In this video, I'm going to look at electroplating. So just imagine you want to make an object out of a metal. So to keep the costs down, you would use something like steel or brass. The only problem with that is if it's an object that you're going to look at that needs to look nice, then it isn't going to look particularly attractive using those metals. So electroplating is a method by which you can coat the outside of the cheaper metal with a more attractive metal. So you can see I've added a red border around this steel or brass box, and that is a very thin coating of a more attractive metal. So let's imagine we had a brass key and we wanted to coat it with silver. So we would set up some apparatus that looks a bit like this. So we've got a pure silver anode. So this is made from silver atoms, and we would have an electrolyte, that's an electrically conductive solution, and we would use something like silver nitrate solution. So that has the formula AgNO3, and because it's a solution, it would be aqueous. So what's going to happen? The silver atoms that make up the anode, they are going to lose an electron and become a silver ion. So that's an oxidation process because the silver atoms are losing an electron. And so what's going to come off here, we're going to get Ag plus ions. Now remember, there are also Ag plus ions in here from the electrolyte. We've also got nitrate ions there as well. But it's the silver ions produced from these silver atoms that come out of the anode and go into the solution. The electrons that are released would travel around the circuit and they would end up at the key. Remember, this is the negative electrode. So because this is negative, these silver ions are actually just going to be attracted all the way across to the key. And then what's going to happen to them at the key or the negative electrode? They're going to pick up the electron and turn back into a silver atom. And so that's how we get the silver coating around the key, because these silver ions have turned back into lovely shiny silver atoms on the surface of this key. What kind of a process would this be? Well, the silver ions are gaining electrons now, and so this is reduction. So at the start of the video I said you would do electroplating to turn a sort of cheap, not so good looking object into a much nicer, more expensive looking object. Let's suppose you wanted to make a steel wire much more conductive, so it would perform better in an electrical circuit. Then you could coat it with something like copper, which is a much better conductor of electricity, but it's quite expensive. So it's exactly the same principle. You'd have a positive electrode made out of copper, so that's the metal you want to coat the wire with. You want the copper atoms that make up the anode to turn into ions, so they're going to come out of the anode and turn into ions, so they would turn into Cu2+. So the chemical reaction that's taken place there is the copper atoms that are making the anode are losing 2 electrons and turning into Cu2+ ions. They are then drifting across to the negative electrode, which is the steel wire that you want to coat with the copper, and then those copper 2+ ions are picking those 2 electrons back up and turning back into the atoms, but they're happening on the surface of the wire now. This process here is oxidation, because it's lost 2 electrons, and this process here is reduction, because they've gained those 2 electrons.